Hello everyone, I'm Salvatore. I work as an Agile Coach, so I help companies make the most of Agile once they decide they want to give it a go. Okay. Tonight I'm going to talk about anti-patterns that I normally see with Agile adoption. Before I do that, I want to say thank you to TRG for inviting me to speak here tonight. It's great to see such a big crowd. And thank you, Travelex, for hosting us as well. Okay, let's get going. So, to tell you this story, I have made up a few fictional characters. One of them is called Dan. He's in charge. Software engineer Laura, she's one of the technical leads on our project. And Anna is a product owner. Finally, I have Pete. He is coming into the story a bit later. He's looking for a job, actually. Okay, so Dan, Laura, and Anna have had a chat about whether or not they should hire a Scrum Master or an Agile Coach. Let's assume they're going to do Scrum, right? That's what most people are trying out these days. All right, so Dan says, well, you know what? I don't know if I can justify the cost right now. We're a small company, relatively small. Everything needs to be aligned to the budget. Why don't you guys go to a training course, learn a bit about Agile. By the time you come back, you'll know enough about it to give it a go. Okay, let's do that then. So they go to that training course, Laura and Anna in particular, and a few other developers. And actually, Laura and Anna haven't been working for that long, 5 or 6 years, right, in industry. So they don't really remember Waterfall. So in the training course, they learn how Agile solves all the problems created by Waterfall development, which for them is kind of a new thing to learn, okay? And then they learn about Agile, which is both incremental and iterative. And they love the idea that from now on, they'll be able to develop products like this. So little by little, in shippable increments, they'll be able to deliver value continuously to a customer. Okay, this feels great. So they can't wait to go back to the office and try this out. One thing they learn at the training course is that Agile and Waterfall have approached value, risk, and adaptability in slightly different ways, right? So with an Agile project, you're hoping to deliver value early and then continuously. And that's not typically happening with Waterfall. Now, with an Agile project, risk is supposed to decrease very, very early in the project, whereas that's something you don't get with Waterfall. And the same can be said for adaptability. In an Agile project, your adaptability should stay high throughout the project, whereas with Waterfall, it gets reduced pretty early. Okay, that's the only concept that's kind of new to them. And as much as they understand this slide, they can't see how they can apply this in the workplace directly, because actually they don't really have any experience of Waterfall. Okay? Right, so back to the office. The next project they're going to work on is going to be an online bookshop. So Dan says, hey, we're building an online bookshop. Let's get started. Now, if I was the product owner, how many of you in the room are product owners? Yeah, don't be shy. Okay, awesome. If I was a product owner, this is more or less what I would do in my first or second iteration. If I had to build a bookshop, and I had to do it in an Agile way, I would have to think of ways in which I can deliver value to my customer early, and then continuously. And at the same time, I want to be able to approach risk in a way that allows me to decrease risk very early on in the project. So I would do something like this. I would build a very thin slice of the end-to-end customer journey, solving a customer problem. The customer wants to buy a book. What I'll do is, instead of investing a lot of time building each step in the customer journey in detail, I'll build a very simple catalog. I'll literally make up a PDF book and hard code it on there. And then the customer can click on that, see how much money that's costing, and then checking it out, entering some credit card details perhaps. And when you get to the payment screen, sorry, it's too early, I haven't done any payment service implementation, it fails. Why do I find this useful? I find this useful because A, it's taking out a lot of risk. It allows me to go to my development team and discuss, hey, what are the integration points? What are the interfaces we're going to need to build this solution? And I'm forcing all the developers, potentially from different teams, to talk to each other early on in the process so that risk can decrease quickly, as we discussed. And at the same time, if I'm a customer, I can see what seems to be an end-to-end product working since day one, right? It doesn't do much. In fact, you can't check out at this point in time. But chances are that when the customer comes to my first demo, they'll say, oh, this is great. And the next thing I'd like you to do is the payment service. So we can get starting, we can get some value out and we can start buying some books. Okay, What I see in practice, so what Laura, Anna, and Dan will do is something else. They'll do this in their first iteration. Okay? And I want to stay on this slide for a minute. I think it's worth it. So how do they get here? Let's put things in the context. So chances are that Anna and Laura are working in a company where you have architects and designers who are busy, shared on multiple projects, and they're working with multiple teams. So they're not part of their cross-functional Scrum team, if you like. So typically, Anna, the product owner, will engage an architect and then maybe a designer and say, this is the next project we're going to work on. We're going to do it in an agile way. We're going to use sprints. I need you, the architect, to design the system. And I need you, designer, to design the user journey. Now, these guys are busy. They're working on multiple projects. They only want to do this once. So what they are going to do next, the architect is going to give you a fully fledged solution of what the final architecture should look like for a product like this. And the designer will give you a fully fledged set of wireframes for what the user journey should look like in the end product. Yeah? Does this sound familiar to perhaps how things go in real life? Okay, now, Anna wants to do things iteratively. She's been to the training course, she gets Agile. When she comes back to the office, she's going to encounter some resistance from some of her developers as well. Because when she goes to the development team and she says, hey, we're going to do this iteratively, the development team is going to look at the wireframes and they're going to be like, we have the designs here. This is what we have to implement. Why don't we just implement it the way it is? What's the point of iterating now? Right? What's the point of doing this when we know that the final product is actually going to look more like this? Yeah? So in the end, Anna and Laura, who have just been to an Agile training course, they get it, but they won't be able to apply it directly to their workplace because they're not ready to take on all the organizational design issues that should be resolved before Agile becomes the status quo. So they'll give up in the end, and they'll do this instead. Now, in the first demo, they're going to show you a fairly refined first page where, as a customer trying to buy a book, you can see a search panel up there where you can, type in what book you want to buy. You can see a tab view where you can actually navigate books by category. And all of that is great. But if you're a customer of this Scrum team, how much feedback can you actually give on the first iteration? The first iteration is definitely an increment, but it's not an attempt to build a viable product. It doesn't show how it solves the problem that the customer is having, buying a book. Okay. So what's going to happen next then is essentially this team, with all the best intentions in the world to try Agile, will end up doing something like this instead. They will have designed the entire system up front. They will have designed the entire graphic user interface up front. And then they'll use sprints to implement it one piece at a time. Implement it and validate it. And some sprints, they may have a potentially shippable increment. Some sprints, they might not. In the end, to them, it doesn't really matter because they know that because of the way they're working, the whole product is going to get realized at the very end when they assembled it all together. To me, this is an anti-pattern. Why? Because if I think of what value, adaptability, and risk curves I get when I work like this, to me, they look much more like a waterfall project than what they should look like in an Agile project. Precisely like that. So one thing that I've seen happening over and over again in the last 5 or 6 years trying to implement Agile with development teams is that Agile without iterations really goes back to being waterfall. You're doing stand-ups, you're doing sprints, you're doing retrospectives, you're doing demos, but you're not really delivering value early. And the risk is not decreasing early either. Okay, that's the first anti-pattern. How many of you have encountered this in real life? Okay, I'm glad. Okay, it's not just me then. All right. Now, chances are that you'll have done this with some teams at some point in the past, but the problem with the first anti-pattern is that sometimes by the time you realize it, it might be too late. So I want to give you a shortcut. How can you detect this anti-pattern early on in the process? Is by going to your demo. The second anti-pattern is what I call demo but no review. I'm going to use Scrum-friendly terminology here, but don't worry if you don't do Scrum. It just applies the same way to other methodologies, including Kanban. Let's say you've just built an increment of product. The idea is that now you are showing this increment to your stakeholders so that they can give you feedback, and then based on the feedback, based on the learnings, you'll decide what to do next. Okay? What I see going on with most teams trying Agile these days is something along the lines of, well, we know what the final solution looks like. We're building it one piece at a time. We're not really using the demo to learn. We're using the demo to show you some progress. So development teams are now using demos to show that they've been busy, to show that they've been fully utilized. Poor product owners don't have access to customers anymore in sprint reviews. And Dan, who is in charge, I mean, he's a really good guy, but now he compares the full scope of the project compared to what the team has achieved so far, and the only thing he can take away from it is, oh my God, we're so far behind. So this is what I call a second anti-pattern of Agile adoption, demo but no review. Why is this an anti-pattern? Because it reduces customer collaboration, and it makes you less responsive to change. How many of you have experienced this anti-pattern in practice? Okay, stop doing this. All right. The third and last anti-pattern I want to talk about is what I call the PO becomes the user story factory. Okay. So what do you think is going to happen when Dan and Laura bump into each other in the office? Of course, Dan wants to know how things are going. Laura says, awesome, I've just finished a task. What's the next thing that's going to happen? Dan is going to have a word with the product owner. Hey, we're late on this project. What are you doing? Developers don't have work. All right, I'll write a user story. How many of you have experienced this anti-pattern in the workplace? Okay. Now, this is really a shame, isn't it? Because product owners should be focusing on value, should be focusing on customers. And I feel that often we've turned the role of a product owner into some kind of delivery manager with user story writing skills. Yeah? Okay. This is also an anti-pattern, for sure. So what's going on here? So in a large organization, you probably come across the first Larman's Law of Organizational Behavior. He's written 5 of them. You can check them out if you're interested. And Craig Larman says, well, organizations are implicitly optimized to resist change, to preserve the status quo for mid-managers and specialists. Now, in a medium-sized company, or even in a small-sized company, you may still have specialists, but I suspect you won't really have that many mid-level managers. So what's going on here? Why do we have these problems in a small-scale setup as well? So I think it's fair to say that our inability to iterate properly, in other words, our inability to apply Agile properly to the workplace, can lead to the utilization mindset. Because we end up working a fixed time, fixed scope projects, where often the fixed scope is actually self-inflicted due to our inability to identify the iteration opportunities. Are you with me? Yeah? So it's a bit of a chicken and egg problem. It's hard to say whether the utilization mindset is the root cause of the problem or whether it's a symptom of a problem. But I've often seen these two together. The inability to iterate and the utilization mindset are often found together in the same workplace. Okay, what do you think is going to happen to Laura in 18 months' time? She hasn't learned much. She feels like, it's time to move on. She's gone from one user story to the next. It's been fixed scope, fixed time all along.
John's going to come along.
Yeah. Which means that Dan now has to hire a developer. Of course, he'll do this because he's in charge. So he interviews Pete, and he says, don't worry if you don't know much about Agile, you learn it on the job. As if they were the experts and could actually teach him. And now Pete says, great interview. Fine, sure. What's going to happen to Pete 18 months later? We'll find out. What's going to happen to product owner, Anna? She doesn't have access to customers anymore. And she's been working with teams who actually haven't learned much about Agile, besides doing stand-ups, demos, and planning sessions. When you're lucky, because if you're late on a project, you might decide not to do retrospectives because they take up time, or not to do demos because the stakeholders aren't coming anyway. Okay. Well, it turns out that Pete actually did learn something about Agile. He got really interested, and he studied something about it in his own time. So a few years later, Pete is giving us some advice about agility. So he thinks that the utilization mindset kills your ability to iterate. But it's also your inability to iterate that may lead to the utilization mindset. It's an interesting perspective, right?
What do you mean by utilization mindset?
Keeping people busy as a measure of progress. Measuring outputs instead of outcomes. He also thinks, hey, I think in a time where we can go live 20 times a day, we have all these tools, continuous delivery. It's amazing. Really, we should be doing Agile to figure out what customers want. The bottom line is, we do Agile because we don't want to make stuff that no one wants. It's about value, right? So we must give product owners and teams access to customers. Okay. Last not least, and that's something that I've picked up in recent years, we often talk about transformation and large-scale Agile as an interesting challenge, and it is. But I actually find that small organizations need Agile and Agile expertise as much as big organizations do. Why? Because they have a higher business risk, and they really need to nail down their value proposition design. They need to make products that customers will want to use. Or they might even go out of business. So Agile and lean thinking is even more valuable in a small-scale setup, I think. Okay, that's everything I wanted to share with you tonight. So thank you for your attention. And if you have any questions, just fire it at me now.